After he passed, she faced his secrets. What she found in his files changed everything. There is a silence that comes after the casseroles stop arriving, after the last well-meaning relative has gone home, and the phone calls dwindle from daily check-ins to weekly pleasantries. It's a silence so profound, it has a physical weight. It's the sound of one person making coffee instead of two. The sound of one side of the bed remaining perfectly smooth. The sound of a life that was once a duet becoming a solo. For Eleanor, that silence had been her constant companion for 6 months. Her husband David, the man she had shared 52 years, 3 children, and a lifetime of inside jokes with, was gone. And in the quiet, echoing space he left behind, Eleanor found herself facing a second unexpected loss, the loss of her financial security. She had trusted David with everything, especially their finances. He was the numbers guy. But in his passing, he had taken a crucial secret with him. A secret hidden in plain sight, tucked away in a locked filing cabinet. If you have ever felt adrift after a loss, if you've ever feared facing the practical realities of life alone, then stay with me. Because this is the story of how a 74-year-old woman, navigating the fog of grief, was forced to confront a financial crisis she never saw coming. And in doing so, she didn't just find answers in a folder. She found a strength she never knew she had. The archaeology of a shared life. Grief, for Eleanor, wasn't a single crashing wave. It was a tide. It would recede, leaving her moments of peace, of almost normalcy, where she'd catch herself humming in the kitchen. Then, without warning, it would rush back in, triggered by the scent of David's aftershave on an old sweater, or the sight of his worn-out gardening gloves by the back door. Her life had become an archaeology of their shared past. Every object in their home was an artifact, imbued with a memory. The house wasn't just empty. It was a museum of a life that was no longer being lived. Her children, bless their hearts, tried to help. They called, they visited, they offered suggestions. Maybe you should join a book club, Mom. We should probably start going through Dad's things. That last suggestion was the one that terrified her most. Going through his things felt like a final betrayal. It felt like packing away the man himself. So the mail piled up on the kitchen table, unopened. His office door remained closed. But reality, unlike grief, does not wait patiently. It arrives in crisp, white envelopes with clear plastic windows. The first one she opened was from the bank. It was a standard monthly statement, something David had always handled. He was the numbers guy, the one who balanced the checkbook with meticulous precision. Eleanor had trusted him completely. Their finances were a black box she'd never felt the need to open. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they had planned vacations and helped their kids with homework, and stared at the statement. The numbers seemed to swim before her eyes. It was a language she didn't speak. She could see the balance, of course, but she had no context for it. Was it good? Was it bad? How long was it supposed to last? This was the second silence David's passing had created, a silence of knowledge. He had taken with him the unwritten ledger of their financial life. The fear that began to creep in was different from her grief. Grief was a warm, heavy blanket of sadness. This new fear was cold and sharp. It was the fear of the unknown. Driven by this new, colder fear, she did what she'd been avoiding for months. She opened the door to David's office. The room was just as he'd left it, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the desk, his reading glasses resting on top. It was here, in this small, quiet room, that Eleanor began the most difficult archaeological dig of her life, excavating their financial past. She found a metal filing cabinet in the corner. It was locked. Of course it was. David was a man who believed in security. After a frantic search, she found a small key taped to the underside of his desk drawer. With a click that sounded deafeningly loud in the silent house, The drawer opened. Inside were dozens of neatly labeled folders. Mortgage, car titles, insurance, taxes, and one thick folder simply labeled retirement. With trembling hands, she pulled it out. Inside were statements from accounts she'd never heard of, 401ks, IRAs, a small pension from a job he'd had 30 years ago. It was a dizzying array of documents, a paper trail of a lifetime of careful saving. But as she looked at the most recent statements, a cold dread began to settle in her stomach. The numbers were smaller than she would have imagined. Not dangerously small, not yet, but smaller. She remembered conversations from years ago, David talking about their nest egg, making it sound like a vast, unassailable fortune. But looking at these papers, Eleanor realized a nest egg wasn't a treasure chest. It was just an egg. It was finite. It could crack. Then she found another folder, tucked in the back. Medical. Inside were the bills from David's last 2 years. The co-pays, the prescription costs, the out-of-network specialist he'd had to see. The numbers were staggering. She saw, for the first time, how much their financial cushion had been depleted by the quiet, relentless costs of his illness. David, in his effort to protect her from worry, had shielded her from the truth. He had shouldered the financial burden alone, never letting on how thin their safety net had become. The love behind his silence was immense. But the consequence of that silence was now her reality. She was alone, grieving, and for the first time in her life, she was scared about money. The education of Eleanor. For a week, Eleanor felt paralyzed by a mixture of grief and fear. She felt a pang of anger at David for not telling her, immediately followed by a wave of guilt for feeling angry at the man she missed so dearly. But on the 8th day, something shifted. Eleanor, the woman who had raised 3 children and managed a household for 50 years, resurfaced. She was not a victim. She was a problem solver. And this was the biggest problem she had ever faced. She made a decision. She would not be defined by her ignorance. She would learn. Her education began not with a financial advisor, but with a simple notebook and a pen. She approached the pile of bills and statements not as a source of fear, but as a puzzle. Her first task, understand the flow. Where was the money coming from, and where was it going? She spent days at that kitchen table, a pot of coffee always brewing. She made a list of their income, David's pension, which thankfully had a survivor benefit, and her own social security. Then she listed the expenses. The mortgage was paid off, a blessing, but the property taxes, the insurance, the utilities, the car payment, the groceries, the numbers added up with alarming speed. When she was done, the truth was laid bare on the lined pages of her notebook. After all the essential bills were paid, she was left with a razor-thin margin. There was no room for emergencies, no room for a new roof, a car repair, or the trip to see her grandchildren she had been dreaming of. Instead of panicking, Eleanor felt a strange sense of clarity. The unknown was now known. The monster had a face, and now she could make a plan to fight it. Her next step was a phone call that terrified her more than any other. She called her daughter, Sarah. Not to ask for money, but to ask for help. That was the hardest part, admitting to my own child that I was in over my head. For years, I was the one they came to for help. But I swallowed my pride. I said, Sarah, I need you. Not your money, your mind, your help to understand all of this. That phone call opened the floodgates of support. Sarah, an organized and practical woman, drove down that weekend. Together, they sat at the kitchen table. And for the first time, Eleanor didn't feel alone. They tackled the bills one by one. They called the insurance companies and discovered David had been overinsured on their cars. A single phone call saved them $60 a month. They reviewed the cable and internet bill and found they were paying for channels they never watched. Another call, Another $45 saved. They went through credit card statements and found subscriptions to magazines David had ordered years ago, still being automatically renewed. Each small victory felt monumental. It wasn't just about the money saved. It was about Eleanor taking back control, one phone call at a time. She was learning the language of finance, becoming fluent in the vocabulary of her own life. Sarah helped her create a simple, realistic budget, not a restrictive plan that would make her miserable, but a conscious spending plan. It was about making choices. Did she want the premium cable package, or did she want to put that money toward her grandkid fund? The choice, for the first time, was hers. During that weekend, Sarah found something else in David's files. A life insurance policy Eleanor never knew existed. It wasn't a large amount, but it was enough to create the emergency fund she so desperately needed. It was David's final act of protection, a secret he had kept that now felt like a gift from beyond. By the end of the weekend, the intimidating pile of papers had been transformed into a neat binder with clear sections. The fear of the unknown had been replaced by the confidence of a clear plan. Eleanor had not just organized her finances, she had begun to organize her new life. The CEO of her own life. The months that followed were a period of quiet transformation. Eleanor had always been a partner in her life. Now she had become the CEO. She met with a financial advisor, not as a passive client, but as an informed partner. She came to the meeting with her binder, with her budget, with specific questions. She learned how to make her small nest egg work for her, how to invest it safely to provide a small but steady stream of income. She discovered she had a knack for it. The same attention to detail that had made her an expert gardener now made her an expert in her own finances. She tracked her spending, she looked for deals, she negotiated bills. She found a sense of satisfaction, even joy, in her newfound competence. But the most profound change wasn't on her bank statement, it was in her spirit. The cold fear that had gripped her was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable confidence. She had faced the worst, the loss of her husband and the fear of financial ruin, and she had not only survived, she had prevailed. She started her book club again. She took that trip to see her grandchildren, paying for it with the money she had consciously saved. She was living her life not with reckless abandon, but with intention and purpose. One afternoon, her friend Margaret, who was also a widow, came over for tea. Margaret confessed her own fears about money, her own ignorance about her husband's financial affairs. And Eleanor, the woman who 6 months earlier had been terrified by a bank statement, found herself becoming the teacher. She pulled out her binder. She shared her story, her strategies, her small victories. She explained the importance of knowing your numbers, of asking questions, of not being afraid to say, "I don't understand, please explain it to me." In that moment, Eleanor discovered her new purpose. Her journey hadn't just been for her, it was for all the other women like her, the women who had trusted, who had loved, and who now found themselves navigating a new and frightening world alone. She started a small, informal money club for her friends. Once a month they would gather at her kitchen table, the same table that had once been a place of fear, and they would talk. They shared tips, they celebrated savings, and most importantly, they reminded each other that they were not alone. They were capable, they were smart, and they were in control. Eleanor had lost the love of her life, and the grief for David would always be a part of her. But she had found something unexpected in the wreckage, herself, a version of herself that was stronger, more resilient, and more capable than she had ever imagined. Losing a partner is one of life's most profound challenges. The emotional toll is immense, but often the practical challenges that follow can feel just as overwhelming. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that it is never too late to learn, never too late to take control, and never too late to become the CEO of your own life. Your financial security is not just about money, it's about dignity. It's about independence. It's about having the freedom to live the life you choose on your own terms. If this story resonated with you, or if it made you think of someone navigating a similar journey, please share this video. It could be the spark of hope and encouragement they need to open that first envelope, to make that first phone call. And if you believe in the power of resilience and the strength that lies within each of us, I invite you to subscribe to Still Here. Join our community as we continue to share the stories of those who prove that even after the deepest loss, our best and most powerful chapters can still be written. You are still here. You are still breathing. You are still worth every effort it takes to feel like yourself again. Taking control of your finances is a powerful way to secure your independence. But what good is a secure bank account if you don't have the physical health to enjoy it? Next week, we'll share the story of Susan, who, after a health scare, implemented 5 simple daily habits that fortified her body and guaranteed she could stay in her own home on her own terms.